You know what's fascinating? Sometimes when someone walks out of our life, we think it's final. We tell ourselves, that's it. They hurt me, they chose something else, and it's over. But then, a few weeks later, a few months later, suddenly, there's that message, that call, that little, "Hey, how are you?" that shows up on your phone, and you can't help but think, wait, why are they back? Why now? And the truth is, it often has less to do with logic and more to do with something very human, unfinished emotional attachment. See, when we get close to someone, when we share experiences, late night conversations, inside jokes, moments of vulnerability, that creates a bond. It doesn't just vanish when someone hurts us. Even if they made a mistake, even if they pulled away, the residue of that connection still exists. And for women, just like for men, that pull can be incredibly strong. They can walk away, thinking they've made a firm decision, but their emotions have a funny way of pulling them back to what once felt like home. Think about it like this: when you spend months, maybe years, building a rhythm with someone, your nervous system literally adapts to their presence. The way they text you in the morning, the sound of their voice when you've had a long day, the way they know your little quirks, these things wire into our habits. So when it's gone, it creates a void, and that void feels unsettling. So what do many people do? They reach back for the very thing that once filled it. Not because they've suddenly figured everything out, not because they've changed overnight, but because the bond is still tugging at them. And here's the tricky part. You might think they're coming back because they suddenly love you more, but often it's simply that emotional attachment refusing to die quietly. They miss the comfort. They miss the familiarity. They miss knowing that in a world full of uncertainty, there was at least one person who understood them. That doesn't mean their return equals commitment. It doesn't mean their return equals growth. It just means that the human heart sometimes wants to revisit the places it still feels tied to, even if those places were the source of pain. Now, let's be honest, we've all felt it too. How many times have you thought you were done with someone, only to hear a song, smell a scent, or drive past a place you shared together, and suddenly it floods back? That's emotional memory. That's the unfinished business of attachment. And just like you've experienced it, so do they. But here's where you have to be careful. When someone comes back out of unfinished emotional attachment, it's not necessarily a sign of readiness. It's not necessarily a sign of change. It could simply be their way of soothing their own loneliness, their own restlessness, or their own nostalgia. And if you're not paying attention, if you confuse their need for comfort with a renewed commitment to you, you'll end up right back in the same cycle that hurt you the first time. So when she comes back, you have to ask yourself, is this about her missing me? Or is this about her truly wanting to rebuild something real? Because missing you is easy. Missing you doesn't require work. Missing you doesn't require growth. Anyone can miss you, but wanting to earn you back, or wanting to prove that this time is different, that's something else entirely. And the reality is, unfinished attachment is powerful. It's like gravity. It can pull someone back even against their own logic. She might have left saying, "This isn't right for me," and then weeks later find herself scrolling through old photos, remembering how safe she felt in your arms, and before she knows it, she's knocking at your door again. But if you mistake gravity for genuine change, you set yourself up to repeat the same lesson. So what do? You acknowledge the bond without letting it blind you. Yes, she may still feel tied to you. Yes, the connection may have been real. Yes, it might feel good to have her back in your life, even for a moment. But your job is to step back and ask, Is this about love or is this about comfort? Is this about growth or is this about nostalgia? Because if it's just unfinished emotional attachment, then what she's really missing isn't necessarily you. It's the way she felt when she was with you. And those are two very different things. And that's the secret no one tells you. People don't always come back because they've realized you're the one. They come back because their heart still has threads tied to you, even if their head hasn't decided to commit. And until you recognize that difference, you'll keep mistaking attachment for intention. So when that message shows up, when that knock on the door comes, remember, unfinished emotional attachment can bring someone back into your life, but it's up to you to decide if that's enough for them to stay. Or one of the most common reasons women come back after they've hurt you is because somewhere along the way, they realize your value. Now, that might sound simple, but let's break it down, because realizing someone's value doesn't usually happen when you're right there in front of them. It often happens when you're not. When you're present, when you're showing up, when you're consistent, it's easy to take you for granted. Human beings are masters at normalizing things. We get so used to kindness, we stop noticing it. We get so used to loyalty, we assume it's just standard. And sometimes when someone has you, they think, this is how it's always going to be. This is what I deserve. This is normal. But then, the moment they walk away, or the moment they push you out, that's when the comparison begins. They go out into the world and realize that what they thought was normal is actually rare. They realize that not everyone listens with the same care you did. Not everyone shows up with the same consistency you did. Not everyone puts in the same effort you did. And in that contrast, your value suddenly becomes clear. You know how sometimes you only notice the importance of something when it's gone. Like when the Wi-Fi goes out and suddenly you realize how much you relied on it. Or when you move away from home and suddenly you start appreciating all the little comforts you used to complain about. That's what happens in relationships. In the moment, they don't see it. But once they leave, once they try to replace you or distract themselves, they realize just how rare what you brought really was. And here's what makes it more complicated. That realization often comes with regret. It's that voice inside saying, why did I let that go? Why did I ruin something so valuable? And regret is powerful. It pulls people back. Because when someone realizes your value too late, they don't just feel your absence, they feel the weight of their own mistake. But here's the danger for you. When they come back with that realization, it can be incredibly tempting to let them straight back in because it feels validating. It feels good to finally be seen. It feels good to hear, I didn't realize how much you meant to me until now. But just because someone recognizes your value doesn't automatically mean they're ready to honor it. There's a difference between realizing something was precious and actually treating it like it's precious moving forward. You see, people don't change simply because they miss you. They don't change just because they woke up one morning and realized you were rare. Change requires effort. Change requires humility. Change requires them to not only say, I see your worth, but to also demonstrate, I'm willing to act differently this time to deserve your worth. Without that, their realization is just words. Now, let me put this in perspective. Imagine someone finds an expensive watch on the street. At first, they don't realize it's worth thousands, so they toss it aside. Later, when they discover its value, they come running back to look for it. But here's the thing. You're not a watch they can just pick up again. You're a person, And if they couldn't see your worth when they had you, it's not enough for them to suddenly claim they see it now. They have to show you that they've grown enough to treat it properly this time. And this is where your self-respect comes in. When someone realizes your value after hurting you, you have to ask yourself, are they coming back because they truly see me and want to build something real? Or are they coming back because they just don't like the idea of someone else having me? Because sometimes what feels like appreciation is actually just possession. Sometimes it's not about them valuing you as a partner. It's about them not wanting to lose access to the benefits you brought. So your job isn't to be flattered by the realization. It's to test whether it's real. Do their actions match their words? Do they show consistency, or is it just another wave of nostalgia? Do they actually step up, or are they just trying to soothe their own regret? Because value isn't proven in hindsight. Value is proven in how they treat you today, not in how much they say they missed you yesterday. And here's the twist. The very act of you not rushing back, the very act of you holding your ground, is what forces them to prove that realization. If you give in too quickly, you rob them of the chance to demonstrate that their recognition of your worth is more than a fleeting thought. But if you stand firm, if you say, I know my value, and you're going to have to show me you see it too, that's when you find out whether they truly mean it. Because at the end of the day, realizing your value is only half the story. Acting on that realization is what matters. Words can sound beautiful, but behavior tells the truth. And unless their behavior shows they're ready to honor you in ways they didn't before, their return is just nostalgia dressed up as love. So when she comes back saying, I didn't realize what I had until it was gone, don't just listen to the words. Watch what she does next. Because that's the only way you'll know if it's real. One of the biggest reasons women come back after hurting you is guilt, regret, that quiet, gnawing voice inside that doesn't let them sleep at night. And I want to be clear here. Guilt is a very different energy from love, but it's strong enough to pull someone right back into your life. When someone hurts you, in that moment, they might feel justified. Maybe they were angry, maybe they felt trapped, maybe they thought the grass was greener somewhere else. But when the dust settles, when the emotion fades, what often creeps in is the realization of the damage they caused. And no matter how hard someone tries to run from it, guilt has a way of following them home. Imagine her sitting alone one night. The noise of the new distractions has quieted down, her phone isn't lighting up with the same excitement, and then, suddenly, your face flashes in her mind. The way you looked at her when you trusted her. The way you tried for her. The kindness you showed even when she didn't deserve it. And instead of feeling light, that memory feels heavy. Heavy because it reminds her of the pain she left you with. Heavy because it reminds her she broke something that mattered. That heaviness, that's guilt. And guilt is a strange motivator. It doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It nags. It says, hey, you messed this up. You hurt someone who didn't deserve it. You need to make it right. That's often when people come back. Not because they've suddenly decided they're ready to give everything you deserve, but because they want to soothe their own conscience. They want to undo that knot in their stomach. They want to hear you say, it's okay, I forgive you, so they can feel lighter again. Here's the part you need to be careful about. Just because someone is sorry doesn't mean they're ready to love you better. Just because they regret what they did doesn't mean they're capable of giving you the relationship you need. Guilt drives them to your door, but guilt alone doesn't sustain a relationship. If they're coming back only to take the weight off their shoulders, then you're not their partner, you're their confessional. And once they get the forgiveness they crave, they may disappear again, leaving you to carry the same burden twice. Now, don't get me wrong. Regret can lead to change. There are moments in life where guilt acts like a mirror, forcing someone to finally face themselves. It can wake people up to their selfishness, their carelessness, their inability to value what was right in front of them. But regret is only the beginning of that journey. What matters is what comes after. Do they take responsibility? Do they acknowledge the specific ways they hurt you? Do they actually show humility? Or do they just want to skip to the part where everything feels good again? Think about it. If someone breaks a vase, they don't just get to walk back in and say, "I'm sorry," while the pieces are still shattered on the floor. Saying sorry doesn't magically put it back together. They have to be willing to kneel down, pick up the shards, and actually do the work of repairing it. That's the difference between guilt that heals and guilt that just wants relief. And here's what I've noticed. When guilt is genuine, it doesn't rush. A person who truly regrets hurting you doesn't pressure you to forgive them instantly. They don't minimize what they did. They don't say things like, "Come on, can't we just move past this?" Instead, they sit with the discomfort. They show you through consistent actions that they're not just back to clear their conscience. They're back because they want to build differently. But when guilt is selfish, you'll see the signs. They'll reach out in an emotional burst, expecting you to soothe them immediately. They'll want your comfort more than they want to provide you comfort. They'll talk about how bad they feel more than they talk about how much they hurt you. And if you're not careful, you'll end up consoling the very person who broke you, just because you're the kind of person who doesn't want to see anyone in pain. And that's where your strength comes in. You have to separate empathy from self-betrayal. You can acknowledge someone's regret without automatically taking them back. You can forgive someone in your heart without granting them access to your life again. Forgiveness is for your peace. Reconnection is a privilege they have to earn. So when she comes back, weighed down by guilt and regret, don't let your need for closure blur the lines. Don't mistake her apology for transformation. Don't confuse her regret with commitment. Listen, yes. Observe, yes. But always remember, true remorse is measured in actions, not just words. Because guilt can bring her back to your doorstep, but only growth will determine whether she deserves to stay. Another reason women often come back after hurting you has less to do with you specifically, and more to do with something that exists inside every human being: the fear of loneliness. That fear can be incredibly persuasive. It can make people rethink choices they once thought were final, and it can drive them straight back into the very arms they once walked away from. When someone leaves, in the beginning, it can feel exciting. It feels like freedom. They convince themselves they're moving on to something better, that there are endless possibilities waiting for them. They might even tell themselves they're going to find someone who makes them feel alive in a new way. And for a while, they ride that high, but then reality sets in. They go home at night, and suddenly the silence feels louder. They wake up and realize there's no good morning message, no one checking in, no one who knows the little details about their day. They scroll through their phone looking for someone to talk to and realize those new conversations don't hit the same. It's in those quiet, empty moments that the fear creeps in. The fear that maybe they let go of something they shouldn't have. The fear that maybe the world out there isn't as exciting as they imagined. The fear that maybe they're not going to find someone who knows them the way you did. And here's the truth: loneliness is terrifying. For many people, it's more frightening than being in a bad relationship. That's why so many return, not because they're suddenly ready to give you what you deserve, but because they don't want to face the unknown. They would rather go back to what's familiar than deal with the emptiness of starting over. You see, familiarity has power. Even if the relationship was messy, even if mistakes were made, there's comfort in what's known. You know each other's rhythms, you know each other's flaws, and in a strange way, that predictability feels safer than the unpredictability of being alone. That's why someone who hurt you might come back. Not necessarily because they've decided you're there forever, but because the thought of not having anyone at all feels unbearable. And this is where you need to be brutally honest with yourself. When she comes back, is it because she truly wants to build with you? Or is it because she's scared to be alone? Because if it's the second, then what you're offering isn't being chosen. It's being settled for. And you deserve more than being someone's safe harbor until they feel confident enough to leave again. Now, don't misunderstand me. Fear of loneliness doesn't make her a bad person. It just makes her human. We all have moments where we cling to what's familiar, even if it's not what's best. Think about the times you've held onto a habit, a friendship, or a job you knew wasn't right, simply because letting go felt scarier than staying. That's the same psychology at work when someone who hurt you reappears. It's not always about love, it's about fear. And fear can be a dangerous reason to reconnect. Because once the fear of loneliness subsides, once she finds her footing again, or meets someone new, that pull toward you can disappear just as quickly as it came. That's why it's so important for you to differentiate between a return driven by fear and a return driven by love. So how do you tell the difference? Watch the intention. If she comes back and the energy is desperate, rushed, fueled by, "I just need you right now," that's usually fear. If she's vague about what she wants, if she avoids talking about growth, if she just wants to pick up where things left off without addressing what went wrong, that's usually fear. But if she comes back with clarity, with accountability, with a willingness to take things slow and do the work, that's when you know it might be real. And let's be honest, you've probably felt the same thing at some point. The urge to reach out, not because you truly believed it could work, but because you just didn't want to feel the sting of emptiness that night. That's why it's so important to recognize it in others. Because when you know the difference between genuine love and the fear of loneliness, you protect yourself from being a temporary fix for someone else's discomfort. So when she shows up again, don't just ask, "Does she miss me?" Ask, "Why does she miss me? Is it because she can't imagine her future without me? Or is it because she's scared of facing her future alone?" Those two answers look very different, and they'll determine whether her return is the beginning of something real or just a pause button on her fear. At the end of the day, you want to be chosen out of love, not out of fear. You want to be someone's decision, not their safety net. Because when someone comes back only to escape their loneliness, they're not really coming back to you. They're coming back to themselves. So if fear is the reason she's knocking at your door again, the question becomes, is that enough for you to open it? Sometimes when a woman comes back after hurting you, it's not about love. It's not about growth. It's not even about missing you in the way you might hope. Sometimes it's about control. It's about validation. It's about making sure she still has a place in your heart, even if she isn't ready to fully give you hers. And this is where things can get really confusing, because when someone comes back, they don't announce, "Hey, I'm only here because I need my ego stroked." No, it usually shows up in subtle ways. The text that arrives out of nowhere, the late night call, the "I was just thinking about you" message, the sudden interest in how you're doing right when you were finally starting to move on. And in that moment, it's easy to think, she must miss me, she must still want me. But what you have to ask yourself is, does she want me, or does she want the feeling she gets from knowing she can still reach me? See, control isn't always about being dominant. Sometimes control is simply about access. It's the comfort of knowing that no matter how far she drifts, she can always come back and you'll still be there. And that knowledge, whether she admits it or not, feeds her sense of power. It reassures her that she mattered, that she still matters, that the bond isn't truly broken. And that can feel intoxicating, not for you, but for her. Validation works the same way. When someone has hurt you, they often fear deep down that they've ruined how you see them. So when they come back and you still answer, when you still let them in, it reassures them, I still have it. I'm still wanted. I still have a place in their life. That's validation. And sometimes people come back not because they want to give, but because they want to take that validation. They want the relief of knowing they didn't lose their hold on you. Now, here's why this matters. If you mistake her desire for control or validation as love, you risk becoming a revolving door. She leaves, she comes back, she leaves again, and every time she returns, it's less about building a life with you and more about confirming to herself that she can. And the tragedy is, if you allow this, you're giving her the gift of reassurance while draining yourself of peace. I've seen it play out so many times. A guy thinks she's back for real. He invests again, opens his heart again, only to find that within weeks, she's distant again. Why? Because she got what she came for. She got the proof that she still mattered to him. Once her ego was reassured, the urgency disappeared. And he's left sitting there wondering, what did I do wrong this time? When in reality, he didn't do anything wrong. He just misread her intention. And this is where self-respect becomes everything. Because the only way to break that cycle is to stop being the source of validation for someone who doesn't genuinely want to choose you. You have to draw the line. You have to decide, I am not here to feed someone's ego at the expense of my own heart. Because the moment you stop rewarding that behavior, the moment you stop giving away reassurance so freely, is the moment you protect yourself from being used as a safety net. Let me ask you something. If she only comes back when she feels insecure, is that love? If she only reaches out when she's lonely or when she wants to test, if you still care, is that commitment? Or is it convenience? Those are the questions you need to ask yourself, because convenience can look a lot like affection in the moment, but it doesn't sustain you. It doesn't build a future. And here's the truth you have to embrace. You don't need someone to come back to validate your worth. You don't need their attention to prove that you mattered. Your value is not dependent on whether someone sees it or whether someone comes running back to confirm it. Your value exists whether they recognize it or not. And the more you anchor yourself in that truth, the less susceptible you'll be to people who just want to use you as an emotional checkpoint, because that's really what it is, an emotional checkpoint. They wander off, they try something new, they get restless, and then they come back to check, do I still have this person? Do I still hold a place in their heart? And if you're always there to answer, you're teaching them that they can keep treating you this way. But if one day they come back and you're no longer available, no longer giving them that comfort, that's when they're forced to confront the reality that their control is gone. So when she comes back, ask yourself, is she here because she's truly ready to love me better? Or is she here because she needs me to reassure her that she hasn't lost me? If it's the latter, then you have to be strong enough to step back, because love isn't about control. Love isn't about validation. Love is about choice. And you deserve to be chosen for real, not used as proof that she still can. So the next time she knocks on your door, don't just ask, does she want me back? Ask, why does she want me back? Because the answer to that question changes everything. Every now and then, a woman will come back after hurting you, not because of guilt, not because of loneliness, not because she needs validation, but because she's actually grown. And this is the one that can make it the hardest for you to decide what to do, because growth is real. Change is real. People can evolve. And sometimes, time apart gives someone the exact perspective they needed to understand what they lost and how they need to show up differently. But let's be honest, it doesn't happen overnight. Change isn't a light switch someone flips because they suddenly missed you. It comes from reflection, from hitting walls, from failing in other situations, from realizing patterns that have held them back, and then doing the hard work to break those patterns. When a woman comes back from that place, it can feel very different. You'll notice the difference not in what she says, but in how she carries herself. Think about it like this. If someone hurt you before, it was often because of where they were at emotionally. Maybe they weren't ready to commit. Maybe they were immature. Maybe they didn't know how to handle conflict, so they ran. Maybe they let fear guide them instead of courage. Whatever the reason, it reflected their state of growth at that time. But people aren't statues, they're works in progress. And sometimes life has a way of forcing people to grow. It might be through heartbreak of their own. It might be through losing something valuable. It might be through being humbled by an experience that made them look in the mirror and realize, I can't keep living like this. And when they grow, that's when they come back. Not just with nostalgia or regret, but with a new level of readiness. Now, here's the important part. Growth is not proven by words. Anyone can say, I've changed. Anyone can tell you they've learned their lesson. But real growth shows up in patterns. It shows up in consistency. It shows up in them being able to sit in difficult conversations instead of running from them. It shows up in them respecting your boundaries instead of trying to test them. It shows up in them taking accountability for what they'd before, without excuses, without shifting blame. That's when you know the growth is real. And here's what makes this both beautiful and challenging. People do change, but not always in the ways we want them to. Sometimes they come back having grown, but their growth takes them in a direction that still isn't compatible with what you need. Maybe she's calmer now, maybe she's more stable, maybe she's finally ready to commit. But maybe you've also grown, and what you need today is different from what you needed then. That's why it's important to not just look at her growth, but to check in with your own. Because reconciliation isn't just about whether she's ready now. It's also about whether you're still the right fit for each other. I've seen this play out where two people reconnect after years apart, and this time it works. Not because the connection was stronger, but because the people themselves were stronger. They had matured, they had healed, they had learned to communicate. And suddenly, what didn't work before finally had a chance. But I've also seen the opposite, where someone came back genuinely different, genuinely changed, but the other person had outgrown the dynamic entirely. And in that case, the healthiest thing you can do is acknowledge the growth, appreciate it, but still walk away. Because growth doesn't always mean you have to get back together. Sometimes, growth simply means she comes back to apologize with clarity, to close the loop, to show you that she's no longer the person who caused you pain. And that's valuable too. That can give you peace. That can help you heal. But you don't have to turn it into a second chapter if it doesn't serve your life anymore. The key is discernment. You have to ask, is she showing me real, consistent growth? Or is she just telling me what I want to hear? Is she back because she's truly ready to build something lasting? Or is she just trying to rewrite the past for her own comfort? Growth is only meaningful if it comes with action. And the only way to measure that is through time. Anyone can put on a performance for a few weeks. Real change reveals itself over months, even years. So when she comes back and she seems different, don't rush. Observe. Let time show you whether her growth is real. Let her actions prove what her words can't. And while you're watching, remember to check in with yourself, because your growth matters just as much as hers. The version of you she hurt is not the version of you standing here now, and it's your responsibility to protect the person you've become. Sometimes growth brings two people back together, stronger than ever. Sometimes growth simply brings closure, but in both cases it's still a gift. Because at the very least, it proves that the pain wasn't wasted, that someone walked away, learned, evolved, and in some small way honored what you once shared by becoming better because of it. And if she truly has grown, if she truly has changed, then she won't just come back to claim you. She'll come back to earn you. And that's the difference that makes all the difference.